Okay, well, thank you everybody for attending. I'm going to start with before I even get into the introduction, I just wanted to thank Paul for being an 11th hour coming in because our original speaker was not able to come in today, and Paul had agreed to speak even though he's at Baku. But I mean, I couldn't think of a more timely topic than what he's talking about today, and this is perfect. This is actually very good. Now, to introduce our speaker, I don't think he really needs a whole lot of introduction to this group. He's spoken many times to CACOR before. He's done a lot of he has degrees in engineering, physics, laser optics. You know his bio's there, but he's done a lot of things on climate change over 15 years and posted over 1,000 videos, and even been interviewed by CTV News in just the last few days. So we are lucky to have him to speak with us and talk to us about what's happening over at COP29, the process, what's happening, what's been agreed to, where do he think things are going, and where we might go. So, Paul, over to you.
Okay, well, thank you, and thanks for having me come on. It's plus 9 hours in Baku. I'm in Baku, Azerbaijan at the COP29 conference, and I'm right now I'm at my lodgings, and there's a grill on the window. So at first I pulled the curtains, and it looks like I'm in a jail cell with the grill. So I thought I better have the curtains there. So first I'm going to I'll change this this sort of what I was intending on talking about, change the order a little bit. So I think I'll start with what's it like to attend a COP, because it's in the news a lot, and you hear Reuters articles, Guardian articles, all kinds of different articles on it, and it's hard to get a feel for what it's really like. So basically, it's like a huge trade show, you might say, with although instead of companies having booths, you have these enormous rooms. It's in the Baku Olympic Stadium, which has been kind of converted, so a sports playing field to with temporary buildings and passageways, and it's massive. I don't know what the numbers are of number of people here, but probably 30,000-40,000 people. So like a large trade show, only instead of companies, you have countries. You have exhibit halls with countries. Most countries have a presence, including Afghanistan. Apparently, I haven't gone to the Afghanistan booth yet, but you can talk to people that were in the Taliban a decade ago. I think that's reached the news, so that's kind of novel. The Russia booth does not border on Ukraine. They're separated by a little bit, which is good because, you might have chairs being pushed over into Ukraine or something from the Russian side, and they don't want fistfights in the exhibit hall. So most countries of the world have a booth, and they pay different amounts to have different size booths. So some of the booths, like Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates and China, have massively sized booths, right? Because they can rent more space. Whereas the smaller countries, small island states, et cetera, have very tiny booths, which kind of mimics the geography, of small islands being much smaller. I just before this talk, I was reading some of the updates of today online, and apparently Argentina has just pulled out of the COP after 3 days. They had 80 delegates here, and their president, Jair, I don't remember his last name, but their president is basically a climate denier and spoke to Trump just yesterday, I believe, and Trump was saying that you're my favorite president, sort of thing, president of Argentina. So the president of Argentina just pulled out his entire delegation just today for reasons that were kind of unspecified. And so it's not just countries that occupy the exhibit hall, it's also clusters of countries. Like there's a Nordic pavilion, the African pavilion. So some of the countries cluster together and form a very large presence there. And then there's the NGOs and the non-governmental organizations. And there's specific topics, like there's a cryosphere pavilion all about the Arctic and Antarctic. And it's the most science based sciencey pavilion, if you like, with charts and graphs and stuff, because everybody's got sort of displays to try to draw in people there. And there's also you know section. So the cryosphere, the oceans is a big pavilion. Brazil has a big pavilion because they're hosting the COP next year in the within in a city, I think, within the Amazon rainforest and so on. So there's these this is a type of setup. There's also side rooms for side events, and I'm with the group Climate Emergency Forum, and we're giving 3 side events. The first one is tomorrow, and these are all accessible online. Some are live feed, but a lot of them are just they're all taped and recorded, and people can search for them and find them later. COP there does issue badges, and you have to have a badge to get in, and there's just different levels of badges. So here, mine is here, and basically this is an observer badge, and it's so it's an observer badge. This is a picture of a younger me. They said, "Do you want a new updated picture?" I said, "No, this one's quite good. I still kind of look like that." And my sponsor is the International Society for Ecological Economics, which this has been how I've been badged for the last number of years. There, you can get a media badge. It gives you access to extra rooms, and then you can get a party badge if you're representing one of the parties. And then there's huge negotiating rooms. And I think it's been very busy the last couple of days because there are about 100 or just more than 100 heads of state here. And there were some major negotiations going on in the last couple of days with heads of state. But most of the action with VIPs and presidents and prime ministers and heads of state occurs in the last couple of days of the talk of the conference, which goes on for 2 weeks. So that's basically how things work. And I want to talk a little bit about what's been achieved so far with negotiations. So negotiators actually started negotiating on the agenda on the Sunday night, the Sunday and the night, the day before the COP started. And those negotiations went on till about 4 a.m., I was told, on Monday morning. So they were tired, the delegates, after negotiating, because they couldn't agree on what to discuss. And they couldn't agree on what's called the stock take procedures. And I'll explain what that is in a minute. So the actual COP for negotiations was delayed. It didn't start Monday morning. It was delayed by 10 hours because all the negotiators were too tired from negotiating till 4 a.m. the night before. So that was, not the best start. The hosting country, of course, the president, the president of the hosting country assigns a head negotiator, and the head negotiator apparently, like the last two COPs, last year was in Dubai, and the year before I wasn't there personally. The year before I was there in Sharm el Sheikh, Egypt. And the head negotiator for these 3 so-called PetroCOP conferences are quite important in the negotiations because they, push things along if they're dragging, or they maybe drag things themselves if they don't like the results and so on. So, it's very questionable why this is a 3rd COP in a state like that. Now, a little bit about Baku. The first thing I say to people about Baku is it's the birthplace of Garry Kasparov. It's where he born and grew up, and he was the world chess championship for about 30 years. He dominated the chess scene. Nobody could touch him. And I would have thought they'd have a memorial about where he was born and information, but his one of his parents was Armenian, so they've kind of made him. There's nothing here to indicate that he was born and grew up here, because Armenians aren't very popular right now in this country. You can look at the history. And of course, this wasn't a country. This was part of the Soviet Union, which broke up in 1991. And then it wasn't a peaceful beginnings for this country. I don't know all the history, but I did walk down in the old part of Baku, and there's a park, Highland Park, and it's a great view of the city, but you do pass huge rows of grave sites. So it's a big cemetery. And if you notice, doesn't take long to notice that the date of death of all of these people was 1992. Everyone, every person buried there died in 1992. And if you look at the ages they were when they died, the dates of birth, they were as young as 17. Most of them were, say, 17 to 21. There were some up to 30, but I didn't see any older than that. So, of course, it was the conflicts that were going on to establish an independent country, et cetera. And I think similar things happened, say, with Georgia and other states that suddenly became countries after the dissolution of the Soviet Union. So there's an interesting history. Very old part of town is very interesting to see, old walls and old structures, and then that's juxtaposed with very modern structures. Probably most famous is the Three Flames towers. They look like flames, and they're massive skyscrapers with offices and exclusive apartments, I think, and maybe some other function, I'm not sure. And then there's a structure that looks like half of a circle, sort of looks like the arch, and there's a circular arch semicircle in St. Louis, I think. And it's similar to that, only it's much more solid, very shiny mirrors, and these things are all lit up at night. So the conference is a big deal, I think, for the city. We walk for about, staying with my friends, we walk for about 20 minutes to get to the metro, and then our badges get us on the metro for free and buses, and we can move around the city with these passes. And the metro, when you go into the metro, you go on this really long escalator downwards, and it goes, I would estimate 100, 120, 150 feet under the ground. It's the longest escalator I've ever seen. And when I think about it, I haven't checked the history of them, but I'm pretty sure this was Cold War bomb shelters, basically, during the nuclear scare and so on. Well, it was actually after, it was probably built well before Azerbaijan became a separate country. It was probably built during Cuban Missile Crisis times and things like that, because that was what people did. People really thought we were going to end up in a nuclear exchange. So it's interesting. A lot of the buildings are kind of, there's a big juxtaposition between the old and the new. I mean, you see a lot of older cars here. You see a lot of Ladas, but you also see Teslas. And the average incomes here are, it's not a Western country, it's an East European country. The most striking thing for me visiting from Ottawa is that something happened to the blonde hair gene, and just about everybody has black hair. Russian spoken by many people, Azerbaijani by everybody else, but there are a number of people that know English, especially the younger people. So a lot of the people that are working at the COP to direct people, and like, they're very efficient, they're very good, they're very helpful, very happy, always smiling. The other thing I notice is that you're in the subway, you're out on the streets, everybody's wearing black. So, when you see the old movies of old Russia that are in black and white, some of them may actually be in color, and it's just everybody's wearing black. I don't know. But it's so black hair and black outfits. Some of the younger people are wearing, different colors, but it was very noticeable to me. So getting back to the conference, I told you about the trouble to start the conference. And then the next day they were focusing a lot. So the purpose of this conference is to get funding to fight climate change. So it's they call it a finance COP. And they're aiming to get $1.2 trillion. And they're a little bit off that target because countries agreed in Paris, I think, or maybe subsequent to Paris, to have $100 billion in funding. And the amount of funding that was actually realized was something like 20 or 30 billion. So nowhere near the 100 billion. And if you want to put that into context, Tesla stock was about 220 bucks 3 weeks ago, and now it's 350 US. So Elon Musk has made $70 billion in 3 weeks. And the world can't come up with 100 billion, nowhere close to that, to fund action on climate. And the target I said is 1.2 trillion, which is what they're talking about. So I think the negotiations are going to be pretty hard. And you know how these conferences go. I mean, they meet. The conference, Saturday is a conference day, Sunday is the only day off. So it's 11 days of negotiations, 11 days of conferences actively on. And like all these other negotiations, nothing results for the first 10 days, and on the 11th day everything happens, and sometimes they extend it to a 12th day, and the negotiators get all tired, and their bosses come in, and the head people, the senior people of all the countries come in and say, look, they're locked in a room, look, we've got to come up with something for the world, and they end up coming out with something and then proclaim it's a great success. So that's typically how it works. And it was interesting because why do I go? Why spend air miles? Why go? Things are, CO2 levels are rising in the atmosphere at accelerating rates. We've had 29 COPs. What's the purpose? And I would have to say that today, for example, give you some idea of what I've been up to. So got into the COP and had an interview for, I'm doing a lot of work for Climate Emergency Forum here, climateemergencyforum.org. They worked out the sponsorship to get me here. I'm also doing my own video channel and filming videos because I got a lot of crowdfunding to pay for my airfare, et cetera, to come here. So I'm doing kind of like synopsises, and I'll post a video after I finish here. It's about 15 minutes long. It's basically what I did today, but you'll know most of it because I'm talking about it here. So I met with my friends Heidi and Charles. They're behind the camera and behind the brains behind CEF, basically. So great, directional microphone recorded on phones. It's all, and then they do tremendous editing to get the videos out. And so I interviewed Nick Breeze. Now, Nick, this is my sixth COP. So over the time, I've managed to meet loads of people. And really, it's the human interaction of who you meet, the face-to-face meetings. There's a lot of serendipity as to who you run into. Like in past years, I've, done stuff with Bill McGibbon and with James Hansen, with people who are leading science on jet streams and on sea ice and cryosphere, also politicians, also, people of all different backgrounds, and you meet these people, you form connections with them, you can brainstorm. And I think human face-to-face meetings we need more of, because you also, you don't understand, you kind of lose track of the humanity of people, when you're always just on Zoom, or if you're not meeting, there's a lot to be gained from face-to-face meetings that you don't get. And this is why I've encouraged CACOR and Club of Rome and other groups to, it's great. We went on Zoom after COVID, but I think it's crucial that face-to-face meetings occur at least maybe once a month or something, or once every few months with these groups. So that's why I was so this is what COP is all about. So Nick Breeze, anyway, known him since about the Paris COP. And we talked about, each of us, we became roommates for the second week of COP in Paris, and that was a very big one because the 2-degree target was set and the 1.5-degree targets were set. And the second week, rooming with Nick, we talked about writing a book, each of us a separate book. And he said I should write a book on climate nutters, about all the characters and personalities that attend climate conferences. And nutters is a very sort of affectionate word in Britain for, crazy people, right? It's crazy in a good way. So we talked about that. Well, he actually wrote his book and submitted the title Climate Nutters, and the editors came up with a title and said, change it, Climate Nutters is too British a term. And he came up with Cop Out, why nations have met and failed. And it's all about his experiences at COP, who he's interviewed since from Paris up until Dubai of last year, and his book just came out in about February of this year. I highly recommend it if you really want to know what happens behind the scenes at COPs. So I interviewed him for about half an hour about what his plans are for this particular COP, and about his book, the writing process, etc. So he wrote in a gonzo style, which is kind of first person style, and he's got all kinds of funny stories. And I don't want to give away too much, but there's one, I'm in there a lot. There's a lot of very funny stories. So the person who brought us all together to go to COPs and provided air miles for me to go to my first COP, which was in 2014 in Lima, Peru, is Stuart Scott. And Stuart passed away about 6 months before the Glasgow Climate Conference in 2021. And he was cremated, and somebody brought some of his ashes to have a memorial in Glasgow. So there were about 20 of us. We met on a bridge across the River Clyde in Glasgow, very cold, rainy, windy, and the ashes were scattered off of the bridge, but they were scattered off the wrong side of the bridge because the wind blew a lot of the ashes onto us, the crowd there. And some of them got onto this very suit. It's the same suit, and it got onto my lapel here, some of the ashes, and I didn't notice. So I met Nick later in the day because he hadn't been at the memorial. And I started talking about Stuart, and we had some of the ashes. He said, "What, you have them here?" "Yes, we scattered them in the river." And then he's scrutinizing my suit, and I look down and I see some ashes right here. And I said, "Yes, Stuart is still with us right here." So there's a lot of different anecdotes like that in the book, how I basically, part of the conditions for me using Stuart's air miles to go to Lima in 2014 was that I put on a polar bear suit and march around the conference for a couple of days, which I did. I met the obligation, but it was really, really hot at that conference, you might imagine. And they're always about late November, early December, but this was in Lima, so it was very hot there. So there's a lot of stories and interest. So Nick, and then we followed up that interview. We had a half an hour gap, and then we interviewed a rabbi from Jerusalem who uh, who basically co-founded something called the Interfaith Interfaith Group on climate, something like to that effect. So what they did is they basically got Jewish people and Muslims and Roman Catholics, all different religious denominations, and they got them to meet together to say, what can we do about climate change? How can we communicate climate change? And each of these religions has vast numbers of followers. So if you have the religious leaders actually talking about climate being a serious problem, etc., then maybe they can communicate it to people that follow them, more effectively than you or I saying climate's a problem, we got to do something, right? And so there's that interfaith aspect, which is very important. I mean, and then after that interview, I had an interview with another communicator of climate who uses unconventional communication methods, and that is a person by the name of Alex Carlin. You can Google him, Alex Carlin, Carlin, and he's actually quite a famous American rock star who traveled all over the U.S. doing in rock bands, and then he learned about climate change and got very concerned. So he started writing songs about climate change. And for some reason, he got drawn to Russia, and he has he's like the Energizer Bunny. He has the world record for the longest continuous rock concert, which is something like 32 hours. And for 7 years, he traveled around Russia by train, and he performed over 200 rock concerts per year, each of those 7 years. And they're not all on climate. It was sometime when he was in Russia, I think, that he started getting worried about climate. So his present passion is about Africa. He thinks Africa is the solution, convincing the vast land. I mean, if you look at the geography of Africa, take the continent of Africa, like you can literally fit North America in it. There's room for lots of Europe. There's room for, parts of South America. Like Africa is just vast. I mean, the maps that we use, the globes, they don't really do justice to the world maps, the scaling, et cetera. People don't realize how large Africa is. So his whole idea is that Africa is the solution. Africa can lead, in climate solutions, and he's composed some rock songs. And during this interview today, he played one of his songs. Now he's got a very loud voice that projects even, I held the microphone up and it was probably too close, and he was playing his guitar quite loud. And this attracted a crowd, needless to say, because we were in just one of the open areas. And so it started attracting a crowd. So of course it attracted security guards. So I'm sitting there with him. I could look out and see the crowd, and I could see one security guard come up and talk on his phone, and I could see another one come up and another one. And they were all sort of chatting, and they started taking videos. But I realized that okay, you have to go when you come into the COP. All your stuff is X-rayed. You have to empty your pockets. It's like onto an airplane. And so Alex brought in his guitar, and if they had a problem with him, if somebody brings a guitar in, one can assume they're probably going to play it, right? So I figured, oh, it's probably okay as long as it's not too disruptive. They let him bring it in, so he just played one song, and it was okay. They didn't come. I mean, I did have doubts whether he would be able to continue playing. I mean, it's just the politics is different, of course, in this country. So anyway, and that interview was followed by a session. I told you about Stuart. Well, Stuart went to about 20 COPs. He knew just about everybody involved in the organization of the COP. So he could go behind the scenes and get favors from media people. He knew people on a first name basis. And he lived in Hawaii. He was an American, and he was very good at that. And he invited groups of people each year to COP. So when I went to Lima and was invited to Lima with the Air Miles, there was about 8 other people, and we all stayed in a convent. Okay, so Stuart had rented out a big area and sleeping places in a convent, which was a walled convent in Lima. And we had to knock on the door and, please let us in. And some nights after imbibing a little bit and you come in after midnight, the guard in the convent was kind of like, he'd kind of give you a nasty look, like you're coming into the convent, a bit inebriated after midnight, and that probably wasn't so good. But I never had to scale the wall to get back in to the accommodation, so that was good. But Stuart, he connected people. And when Stuart passed away, 2 groups basically formed to take over the baton. One of them is Climate Emergency Forum, which I'm involved in. And the other one is called Facing Future, which kind of splintered and is another group. And each of Facing Future and Climate Emergency Forum have 3 separate press conference rooms booked, because we know the procedure, we learned it from Stuart, and we know what to do. And so we're kind of carrying on, his work. So Facing Future had a session today all about climate finance and failure was the topic. And it was 4 panelists, from all over the world doing finance stuff, and, a moderator who we know. So you get to really know a lot of people and what they're doing. And then after the press conference, we had we had another yet another interview, and so it's a busy day, and it's almost midnight, and I'm doing this. And when we went to dinner, that was really interesting, because we went to dinner. The food prices are extremely high within the COP, but you find out that lots of the booths in the exhibit hall offer free coffee and free food. So, after a few days, you figure out where they are, and then people say, "Where did you get that coffee?" And over. So the Israeli pavilion is very busy because they have a free coffee section. And there's another pavilion that has pretty much free food most of the time, and you can go there. And so you get to know these sorts of things. You can, and there's a lot of walking. I mean, I have my watch is a Garmin, and it tells me I've done 16,000 steps today. I mean, some of it was walking to the metro, but most of that, probably over 10,000, was within the venue. I mean, it's basically a converted football, or Olympic stadium. I think it was football that was being played. So you walk for literally miles when you're within the conference. And I also have I have the detector, it's called the Aeronet 4, and it measures temperature and CO2 and number of steps and so on, as I mentioned. So it's not number of steps, that my watch does that. So I kind of monitor what's going on inside the COP. And but the organizer, it's a tough thing for the organizers because it's such a large event. It's probably much warmer outside than they expected, so their heating system is a bit too high. Nobody's fainted as far as I know. Another big problem with the COP specifically here is, okay, you book a place to stay for 2 weeks on Airbnb or bookings.com or something else. And if you're a party delegate or something, they're paying and you're booking in, one of the nicer hotels very close to the venue. But if you're an observer or an NGO, then you're booking your accommodations on Airbnb, and then some people book months in advance and they arrive at their accommodation and it's been canceled. Sorry, we had to cancel you. You can't like it's canceled. I mean, I was canceled from my place about two. I decided to go at sort of at the last minute, just about 2-3 weeks ago, and I got an accommodation booked, and then a few days later it was canceled, and they suggested, hey, take this one or this one or this one. So I took one of them, and it wasn't canceled, but when my flight arrived late on Friday night, I got a cab to take me to the address for my accommodation, and there was no such accommodation existing. We arrived at the address and there was nothing there. So I contacted the landlord who set up the accommodation on Airbnb, and he said, oh, that's the wrong address. Here's the correct address. So so I still had the cab, so we go to the new address and nothing there, couldn't find it. I gave up, and luckily, I managed to just call Heidi, who salvaged the situation and said, yeah, come and sleep on the sofa bed at our place. And I said, okay, I'll deal with it tomorrow, the next day, which is Saturday morning. So Saturday morning we head over to my accommodation, and it was, let me just say, without being too critical, that it wasn't really an accommodation. It was just a room with no heating, plywood door, padlock on the lock. The shower was the next room building over, and there was no door, and the toilet was the next one over, and there was no door. And I didn't see a lot of lighting, so I think, and I would be returning at night, and it would be not something I wanted to do. So I just gave up on that, and luckily managed to stay with my friends. But this happened. I've heard these stories happen over and over with people, accommodations being canceled because the prices during the COP for hotels anywhere close to the venue, instead of their normal price of reasonable, maybe 50 American or 100 American at most per night, suddenly went up. Rooms were going for 500 or 600 a night. So hotels, so Airbnb people, bookings people, hotels, even hotels near the venue were canceling and then raising their prices greatly because they realized, they heard stories from other people in the city that, hey, I'm getting 500 a night for my place. Of course you cancel the person. And there doesn't, the COP people, I don't know if they're really aware of this, the UN officials, the city people, it doesn't look good for the city, the country that's hosting, to have this sort of thing happen. So there might be some stories in the press, but this stuff is generally behind the scenes. You see your articles in Reuters and stuff about negotiations, but you don't generally hear this sort of thing. So you're hearing it from me. So that's a bit of a drawback. I mean, there's nothing worse than flying for, being at airports and on planes for 21 hours straight, and then taking a cab for an hour and then finding there's no address where you're supposed to be staying. That's not something you really want to do when you're traveling. So anyway, that's my gripe. I mean, the organization of COPs is quite different. Some countries do a much better job on short notice, notably Spain in 2019, because the COP in 2019 was supposed to be in Santiago, Chile, but the metro was destroyed by protesters about a month before the COP was supposed to start. So they moved it. Spain took it up and ran a wonderfully efficient, well-organized COP and did everything within less than a month. Whereas other COPs have, it's taken the first week to iron out the wrinkles and get things going, and then the second week is usually smoother. So if you ever think of going to a COP for just 1 week, make sure you go the second week, not the first week. So anyway, so I've got a few more minutes. So, why do I keep going? I think, you kind of get bitten by the COP bug. It's sort of the only game in town, according to Jonathan Nerel, who's the rabbi who I had the second interview with, who started the Interfaith Pavilion, and he's been to quite a few COPs. He's been all around the world, and he's really, made quite a significant difference, because he's managed to join all of the religions of the world, with a common idea that the climate is in trouble. We're destroying God's creation, the earth. We set up artificial boundaries on our planet called countries, and there's conflicts from one to the other. And we're increasing, corporations are much too strong. I asked him actually what advice he would have for people who are feeling kind of hopeless, especially youth who see what's happening with climate. It's getting worse. This year, by the way, it looks like we're going to be at 1.55 or 1.60 degrees Celsius over what they call pre-industrial and define as 1850 to 1900, where I should note that the original pre-industrial was the year 1750, and from 1750 to the average of 1850 to 1900, we've increased temperature anywhere from 0.15 to 0.2 degrees Celsius. So when I say so if we are 1.6 this year above the 1850 to 1900 baseline, you need to add 0.2. We're actually 1.8 above the year 1750, which is the original baseline when that 2-degree number first came up. Just to note, say it's shifted. There's still a lot of 1.5 slogans, 1.5. We're an overshoot over 1.5. I mean, we're past it. We've had, if you go back from about June or July of 2023, we've been well above 1.5 each month. We've had some months like December 2023 and February 2024 when we were between 1.75 and 1.8 degrees Celsius above the above that 1850 to 1900 average. So we're well above. We're well above it, and people really need to stop trying to fool themselves. You're not fooling anybody else. You just need to look at the data and say, well, yeah, we're over 1.5. And don't tell me that you need to be over for 10 years in order to say that you're over, 10-year average or whatever, because you could always extend the sliding scale. You could say we need a 100-year average of over 1.5. I mean, it becomes meaningless. It becomes just a pointless game of trickery, right? So anyway, that's one thing. I found out that people, I heard of a couple students who traveled by land into Azerbaijan, and I'm a bit surprised because everything I'd read, the borders weren't. You could only fly in. You couldn't go. The land borders were all closed. So it's quite an experience being here, but it's an experience going to any of these COPs. But this one in particular, I don't think, unless I wanted to see Garry Kasparov's birthplace and where he grew up. I don't, this isn't probably a place where I'd like go on vacation, but I do know since coming here, I've heard of some of my wife's friends have actually been here on vacation and say, oh, you got to go to the old town. It's really neat. And, the Caspian Sea is right there. The whole city and town is actually, it's actually about almost 30 meters below sea level. Okay, so the Caspian Sea surface and something's gone wrong here. Okay.
You're good. We still have you. Speak too soon. Let's give him a little bit of time to come back. He's here he comes. He's in the waiting room coming back.
Okay, I think I'm back. So I don't know what happened there. I think somebody tried to make a phone call to me and it kicked in and cut me out of Zoom. So it's interesting because the whole region is it's about 100 feet below sea level, and the Caspian Sea is a sea. It's salty. It's a very large area, not as big as the Black Sea, but it's very large, and the salinity is about a third or something of the ocean salinity. There's rivers, lots of rivers going into it, the biggest being the Volga, and but there's no rivers flowing out. So the water loss is just through evaporation and the minerals build up. So it's salty. And Baku had the first oil well drilled, I believe, on the planet in about 1848, well before the Texas and Saudi Arabia sites. So and natural gas is very big. Sort of there's many of these features called mud volcanoes where the methane actually pours out. The ground is soft and the methane pours through and bubbles up and creates a little tiny volcano, maybe 30 meters diameter or something. Baku also had the first oil rig in the world, and they put an oil rig offshore and then sank some ships around it and had more oil rigs and then built it up. And it's basically an artificial island with about anywhere from 2,000 to 5,000 people living on it permanently with apartment buildings and stores and roads and stuff. And it was in the James Bond movie where the villain is an oil guy. I don't remember the name of the particular James Bond movie, but these are some interesting things about the city. So I think I've gone about 45 minutes. And but so the negotiations are very much up in the air. I mean, the stock take to is to try to monitor. It's basically to look at what promises were made in Paris in 2015 and how close to our countries to meeting those promises and what are the new promises going to be. So there's a lot of negotiations like that going on behind the scenes. And unless you have a party badge, you can't go in and watch them. A lot of them there's live feeds too, but some of the more critical ones are behind closed doors. So like I said, most of things happened in the last few days for that part of the conference. So why don't we go to questions?
Thanks, Paul. Okay, can you hear me? Is that good? No?
Yes, I'm good. I'm good. Yes.
So just as moderator, I'll ask the first question, actually. I'm just wondering, how optimistic are you that COP actually accomplishes anything? And I mean, with all these countries and all the money has been spent, but I did, just for some of you who don't know, I heard that the the person who's heading all the COP conferences, actually, there's a video on him. I don't know how real it is, but that he said he would try and, you know, help negotiate with the fossil fuel companies, but really negotiate new deals. That's an aside, but I'm just wondering, how optimistic are you that this is all actually going to accomplish anything towards reaching where we really want to go?
Yes, and great question. And yes, there was some reporter who posed as an oil executive and had a Zoom call or something that was recorded with the person who was designated to be the leader, the country, Azerbaijan's pick for running the COP, and they were trying to sell some oil, or gas things. And I think they may have even spoken today at the COP, and there was some news article that they said, oil and gas is sort of, it's God's gift to a particular country, and you have to use it, right? And like if you have, if your country has nickel or lithium or gold or silver, I mean, the country is going to dig those up and use them. I mean, what country wouldn't, right? Unless they had financial incentives not to do so. So there's all these things going on. And then, of course, the US election with Trump, and who knows if he's going to get away with destroying NOAA. I mean, they're talking about closing down NOAA and the Department of Education and some other places. So it gets pretty gloomy. But then you have the CEO of Exxon Mobil saying publicly that he's going to try to convince Trump to stay in the Paris Agreement, to not leave it, because oil companies, of course, did some of the original research that said climate change would be a big problem, but of course they didn't. They covered it up, and then they used it, and basically they came up with the idea of a personal footprint, so that the individual consumer was responsible for climate change, and the oil companies were just supplying a product that everybody wanted to buy. So you have to look at, of course, with the federal government changing in the US. I mean, you have to look back to what states and city mayors and people did, NGOs did in the US from 2016 to 2020. And, states, governments kind of took over and banded together and attended COPs and things as states instead of as a federal government. And, mayors did a lot of different things. So there was, action at those levels. The COP after Trump was elected in 2015 and became president in 2016 was a very gloomy COP, and that was Marrakesh. I didn't go, but it was very gloomy, sort of funereal sort of situation. This one's quite different. I think people are, we've seen a Trump administration before, so people are kind of talking about what they're going to do to gear up around it. One thing that does give a lot of hope is the growth of solar energy for electricity, because solar energy, I believe it just passed about a terawatt of capacity, which is quite a bit of energy. And within 3 years, it'll be 2 terawatt, or sorry, solar electrical energy production, it just passed 2 terawatt, I believe. And it went from 1 terawatt. It took 68 years to get 1 terawatt of solar. And then it took about 3 years to get the 2nd terawatt. So the doubling period is about 3 years. So if that continues, it'll be 4 terawatt in 2027. And in 2030, it'll be about 8 terawatts. So if it follows that pathway, then, and it's doing it because of economics, it's not doing it because of climate change. It's doing it because it's just becoming cheaper and more efficient and the best way to go. It's capitalism. I mean, it has to continue growing like this because of capitalism, unless it's actively stopped. And maybe it will be dampened in the US, but no, not in, I mean, 90% of the solar cells that go into solar panels, these are the 6-inch by 6-inch kind of wafers. You put electrodes on, put it in the sun, you get power, about 7 watts, I think, from one of those panels, the little cells, which then go into the solar panels. And China's producing 90% of them. And the purity is going up and up and up. So they talk about 10 nines. So the purity of the silicon, the sand, melted sand, is 99.999999%. There's 10 nines involved in the purity. And it's just amazing. And it's just, I think it's going to be unstoppable soon. If it continues at the present rate, then by 2026, the solar electricity generation will exceed nuclear. By 2027, it will exceed wind, which is bigger than solar right now. And by 2030, it will displace natural gas. And a few years later, it'll displace coal and oil and everything else. So if the trajectory continued, then it would replace, we'll get more energy from solar than from all other energy sources combined in about the 2035, maybe 2040 time scale. And
I hope that's true.
Now, the other thing is that these projections are always seem to be conservative, right? Because the projections just a few years ago for solar growth were way behind, way lower than what we're actually doing in reality now. So this is a really sort of bright spot. And the electric car growth is phenomenal, but we want to put tariffs on to slow it down. So if we do, we'll do a lot of dumb things to which dampen the growth, but I don't think we're going to be stopping it at this point, because it's just makes economic sense. So these sort of things are crucial. And as Rabbi Yonatan Nerl said, he said that our operating system is broken. It's like our operating system is the old DOS on PCs, and we're trying to run Zoom on it and it doesn't work. We've got to change our operating system, which is a fossil fuel based system. And because the alternatives are out there and they're growing and they're scaling. And also this COP, very interestingly, has a lot of stuff on carbon dioxide removal, something called OCDR, which is ocean carbon dioxide removal. And this is by groups at the Cambridge Climate Repair Center, who is a huge area that, it's a very reputable place that is studying the heck out of this. And there's lots of other, like 10 years ago, people would laugh and say, oh, we can't take we can't do CDR, we can't do solar radiation management and cool the planet. I've talked about a 3-legged bar stool / fossil fuel emissions is one leg. Carbon dioxide removal, methane removal is the second leg, and solar radiation management is the third leg. And all of these things we're going to be studying the heck out of in the next few years, because it's really the view from scientists and policymakers and politicians, like it or not, it's still very controversial for a lot of people. But if we have a technology that can pull a gigaton of carbon out of the atmosphere, then we're gonna do that. We can't really stop that. Some billionaire can do that, basically, if we get a good enough technology. So one of the things I've always, up until about a year or two ago, I really admired Elon Musk for his engineering capability. I don't know how many, most people on this channel probably saw the rocket come down and break and land and be grabbed by mechanical arms on Godzilla. Well, if you can do that sort of technology, surely you can figure out how to take carbon out of the atmosphere. So I always kind of, and Tesla and the Boring Company, the engineering, and some people say, well, it's just he hires good people who do these things. He knows not much about it. But watch a video where he walks around SpaceX with a guy called the Everyday Astronaut, and they talk for 3 hours on how a rocket works and the sloshing and the baffling. He knows everything about those engines and the rockets and stuff. Musk himself is, but he seems to, he's taken a hard right lean, and he may be, he's just been nominated as the US efficiency expert. They're talking about firing. I think every federal employee in the government, well, they're trying to get them to sign a document which says that they'll be loyal to Trump and the new government. Essentially, that's what the document says. And they're going to, probably about a third of them in the government will be fired, on day one when Trump comes in. So there's a lot of very draconian things going, and Musk has been very opportunistic. He took a huge gamble backing Trump. It worked for him, made 70 billion on Tesla in 3 weeks. right? I mean, things are really changing, but he also owns X, which took away all the checks and values on it, and now it's slewing propaganda everywhere. So it's a very my crystal ball is completely opaque at this stage. Stuff I thought would happen won't, and I think it's chaotic, and when a chaotic system, it's very hard to predict anything.
I can
So,
understand.
but if Musk understood climate change, does he? I mean, you could ask that question. If he understood it, and if he was at this conference and walked around and saw, okay, these companies can maybe remove CO2 from the atmosphere, just remove methane. Methane would be the easiest thing. If we could remove methane from the atmosphere, we could chop warming by about a third. And methane is a short-lived gas, so if we removed it from the atmosphere, we'd see effects within several years. We wouldn't have to wait. Where CO2 is much longer lived. So if we there's if we, I mean, is it if Musk was worried about climate and did all these things and put money into climate, then we'd be a long way towards making significant advances in addressing climate change, right? So we're in a very strange world. I mean, I don't know, who knows what's going to happen, but what I think, I mean, you've got a narcissist and working for another narcissist. They're going to have a fight like school kid bullies soon, and Musk will be persona non grata. Trump, I think, will be very jealous of that Musk is richer than him and smarter than him, and since Trump has the power, I don't think that friendship is going to last at all. So, but I mean, and the world, what happens in the world is kind of important on that. Here we talk about two individuals and how they act in a schoolyard, where is one a bully and the other not. I mean, that affects what's happening around the world. Like, so, it's a very strange sort of situation that we're in.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Dave, you're on deck. Sorry, Dave, you're on now. Your question, and after Dave will come Art.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Interesting talk, Paul. In preparation for this meeting, I did a little bit of reading of some of the stuff that's online. I saw two estimates of how many people are going to get approved for the conference. One was 50,000, one was 65,000, whereas the last COP28 was about 100,000 people. I don't see why these numbers of people are being invited or allowed into these conferences, but there you go, whatever.
Yeah,
This is my question.
I agree completely. I don't see that either.
Well, I think maybe because the idea is in fact not to reach any kind of meaningful agreement. Anyway, here's my question. Because the guy who said that oil and gas are God's gift to us, whatever God that is, said this. He said, we're going to increase our oil and gas production. And what I would like to know is, by how much does our Azerbaijan plan to increase its oil and gas production according to the head of the COP? Who's the mouthpiece who said it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it's just it's very dystopian, right? Like, it's just, I mean, it's part of the yeah, it's mind-boggling for a thinking person, logical person, educated person. It's like head shaking, bang your head against the wall, like what's going on. And I think that's sort of the situation that we're in, not just with climate now, but with a lot of other things, with the US elections. And I think a positive for Canada is I don't see how people will really vote for Poilievre if there's harsh crackdowns come Trump's inauguration, mass layoffs. Canada will be like in kind of watching with amazement and saying, we don't want a right-wing government in our country. So I think Trudeau might have been smart by not stepping down. So that's just my view. I mean, and I think Pierre Poilievre was up 22 points or something in the polls, and I think the latest polling that's all comes after the COP, usually they're like longer time periods, but I think his polling is cut in half. His lead is cut in half, especially when Canada takes action, and like there's going to be border issues. I mean, the border guy in the US has already said Canada's like a sieve and has to crack down. Now, they can't do a lot to Canada because they get a lot of our oil and they get a lot of our forestry and our natural resources. And there's talk about them coming after our water and so on. So, our government has had experience dealing with Trump in the past, right? So if they can get a lot of people, a lot of voters that they, supposedly lost back by taking strong, good, sort of Canadian action to protect our interests against the US after. So that's one thing. But I don't understand why, this COP is the third that's been in a petro state, basically. And Baku, because they supplied, Azerbaijan supplied about 80% of the world's oil around 1900, right? Because Saudi Arabia and other countries weren't producing it. And now I think it's about 20% of the global supply. So if they increase it, 10% or 20% over the, it's going to be an increase. But, if we had ways to remove carbon quicker than it's going into the atmosphere, then we wouldn't worry so much about it. I mean, what do we, like people say to me, okay, why are you flying to the COP? I mean, how much fuel goes into that? And, how do you heat your house? And like, there's all the tropes. And what is interesting is that I don't know if you've played around with perplexity.ai, the artificial intelligence. So if somebody says, why are you flying to the COP, spending these, or spending so much fuel and heating your house with natural gas, and you can cut and paste those complaints into Perplexity and say, please respond to these, and it will generate the facts. We get a bit emotional. Well, here we're being attacked by a denier again. It's the same old thing. So instead of just deleting the comment to my YouTube channel or whatever, I can just go to Perplexity, put it in there, and it generates a very lengthy, detailed answer as long as I want. So I cut and paste and put it in, and I never hear from the complainer again, right? So it's a great, using AI as a sort of like a co-pilot or an assistant, I think is becoming very useful at this stage.
Okay, thanks. Art.
Yeah, before we got going, you were talking about carbon dioxide in your micro.
I'm sorry, I meant to say Claude. John, you're on next.
Okay.
John Lake.
Yes.
And I guess I'd like you to try and amplify on that, because I found that quite fascinating, particularly the impact that potentially is on yourself and your own health and well-being.
Yes. So I've got this device. It's called the Aranet 4, and you can buy it at Best Buy store. Best Buy carries it now, and it's about $300. It's not cheap, but it measures temperature, humidity, and CO2 level. And the data is sent to an app I have on my phone every minute, I believe. So I've been wearing it all week, and I can produce data of how the CO2 varied where I was. Now, if I stand here and breathe on it, right, the level's going to go up. And I wear it on this, but if I don't have a coat or something, if it's against, a dress shirt, then it's getting some heat from my skin. So that'll throw the temperature off a bit. If I can keep it in my pocket or so on. But I just wanted to have an idea of levels. So Monday was, so I've been wearing it all COP, and a couple of days, security have kind of looked at it and scrutinized it, and I've had to explain to them what it is, because they don't know what it is, right? So, you go onto a plane or something, and they see something they've never seen before. They kind of like, what is that? How does it work? And I show them the app, and I'm just measuring CO2. And this is a climate conference, so I figured I shouldn't have a problem getting it in. So one of the first things after arriving at COP on Monday, I forgot to mention in my talk, was I went to the Canada Pavilion to see what was going on. And lo and behold, Stephen Guilbeault was giving a talk in the Canada Pavilion. He's Canada's Environment and Climate Change Minister. And the talk was about to end. So I kind of listened to the last little bit, and then there was questions after, and people kind of crowded around him. And I was patient. So, I got to chat with them. And I said to him, what do you think about the 1.5 target? I said, this year is supposed to be 1.6, 1.55, 1.6. Like, how can people still talk with a straight face and honesty about keeping it below 1.5. We're in overshoot. And, you know, he kind of hedged and said, well, yes, it's a UN number, really. I mean, we kind of know what's going on. And I said, well, why don't you emphasize this a bit more when you're on CBC or CTV? Like, emphasize more to people, you know, what climate change is doing. Like, I never hear him talking about extreme weather events, specifically, say, tornadoes in Ottawa, you know, torrential rain leading to flooding, Spain's being hammered, you know, of course, Hurricane Helene and Hurricane, it's not Mitch, it's Milton. I've been saying, I think I said Mitch, and Mitch was hit the Caribbean or Latin America years ago. Milton. Anyway, I mean, they basically destroyed towns in the Appalachians with vast amounts of rain. So we're, you know, and I talked about, you know, I explained the reason why in previous talks, the great warming of the Arctic, the jet streams slowing and becoming wavier. But there is a huge wrench in the climate system, and that's the ocean currents, the AMOC, because papers have recently come out. Stefan Ramsdorf from Potsdam is actually extremely concerned. He's been looking at the AMOC for years, and he's extremely concerned that we're, you know, getting very close to some tipping point. And this would throw a wrench in things because it would make the North Atlantic very cold. It would make Western Europe very cold, Eastern Canada very cold, and it would disrupt the whole circulation system. So but anyway, getting back to Gilbo, I had this sensor. And I said, yeah, by the way, I said, the air you're breathing right now was about 1,200 parts per million. And I said, that's 3 times higher than the 420 that people are talking about. And he was very curious and very interested and asked me about it. His assistant noted the device. So maybe he'll be wearing one of these on television soon, and you know where that came from. But it's a very interesting device because Monday was crazy. It was very, very warm outside. So they had the heating system on way too high inside. And you're walking in a hallway, and it was the first day, and it was packed, wall-to-wall people through the hallways. And there just wasn't enough air circulation. So it reached about 27, 28 degrees Celsius and 67% humidity. Now, if you reach 31 degrees Celsius and 100% humidity, you actually can't live in those conditions for more than about 6 to 8 hours. You get heat exhaustion and then you die. Right. So we weren't there, but we were, you know, we were getting very close. And there has been studies. Just go on perplexity.ai. This is your project assignment. Everybody watching this video, go to the website perplexity.ai and ask it the question, can you tell me how human cognition is degraded by high CO2 levels? And it will give you all of these reference of papers and studies, and it will tell you that human cognition starts to decline, I think at about 800 parts per million. By about 1,200, it becomes much more significant. By a couple thousand parts per million, your ability to reason and your cognition and decision-making declines. So think about the irony. Here we have negotiators at a conference trying to do smart things, and because the indoor air CO2 level is so high, their cognition and reasoning and ability to make decisions is decreased. So it comes back to CO2. So CO2 wants to take out humanity, I guess, is the conclusion from that.
Yeah.
Okay, so
I just had another quick one. I don't want to take up a bunch of time, but it's on language. I mean, you're at a UN conference, people speak multiple languages. I presume English and Russian are the predominant languages. Is that correct? Or what languages do you hear?
Yeah, the official language of the UN is English. So people, you know, in order to become a negotiator for any country in the world, you have to pretty much know English, or you have to, you know, work with people who have enough people that know English to go in and negotiate in that. And then there's, you know, the smartphones are getting quite good. You can get English translators, you know, often, you know, when we arrived and you want to communicate with somebody, you can just go to the Google app, translate, and you can type your things in English, and then it translates it into Russian or Azerbaijani or whatever. And then you hold up your phone and it the translation is there for the person, and they type in their phone and do the translation to English, and you can carry out a stilted conversation. There's also voice recognition things, but they're much more error prone than the typing ones. So, but anyway, I think, you know, English is the language of the UN.
Sure.
Okay,
So
thank you. Thank you.
John Legg, you're next, and then after that, it'll be John Meyer. It'll be on deck.
Thank you, Richard. And Paul, I admire how you can hold it together after what a hell of an arrival process and just your living conditions. I mean, anyway, the fact is you are able to actually remain with your focus on the ball among all the questions you're receiving. And of course, the ball is this moving target, which, as you've said yourself, is mixed in with Trump and his own probable ways of acting. But my own question has to do really with what Richard asked, and this is a little bit unfair because, as you said yourself at some point, better to arrive for the second week, not for the first week. So I'm asking you a question which has to do with how do you envisage? You cannot know, no bloody way can you know the results of this. And you, at the beginning, you, and with proper irony and so on, you said, you know, there will be something which will be pulled out of the sky at the last moment, and it'll be called a success. Well, okay, but we all know the object of this COP is cash, and presumably it's cash or resources to the poor countries to get their own economies into gear without fossil fuel. So if you had to look ahead and imagine how this process is going to somehow come up with something, it seems most unlikely. I mean, the whole bloody place, the locale of this place is just an unlikely place to be even thinking about climate when, you know, the head of the delegation and the country talks about, yes, oil as a gift from God, and he doesn't say it, but his idea is we're going to bloody well produce as much as we can. When, of course, as we know, the climate workers, and you're really one of them, want to do the opposite. So, but how do you think this is going to proceed and come out with something which will allow the climate workers, and I include myself as one, very small compared to your efforts, to come up with some hope about continuing?
Well, I mentioned the unprecedented growth in solar power, right? It's just incredibly fast advances. There's a unit that physicists use for, like, we know, you know, distance metric, and distance over time is velocity or speed, and then distance over, take the derivative, the slope, distance over time squared, you know, acceleration. Well, take another derivative of acceleration, the slope of acceleration, and people call it the jerk. Okay, so so solar power is jerking upwards, right? It's the acceleration of the growth is accelerating itself. And this is the jerk. And it doesn't take many years before solar dominates all energy produced on this planet. And you know, we have to change the operating system. I mean, surely people aren't thinking, when we talk about electric cars, surely we don't intend to replace the 1.5 billion cars on the planet with 1.5 billion electric cars. There's a company in Azerbaijan, in Baku, that's very prominent for transportation. It's called Bolt. And you load a Bolt app on your phone, and if you have to go anywhere, you go into Bolt, and it knows where you are from the GPS, and you put in a destination where you want to go, and pick a car, an econo car, mid-sized car, large car. Basically you do that and press a button, and it tells you a car, it will pick you up in 1 minute. A car swings around the corner and stops, and it tells you the price, and the price is extremely low. Like, you might be going through city traffic for half an hour and pay the equivalent of 5 manat, which is about $3.50 Canadian. And, you zip off to your destination, and, why own a car? Right?
Exactly.
If you're in the city, I mean, you use this. So the point is that car ownership should probably plummet, at least in cities, because it's costs you more money.
That's what they do in Singapore.
Right? So in China, it's huge, right? So that 1.5 billion cars, we could probably replace them with 1/10, 10% or 5% of that number of electric cars, driverless or not. But think of it, if we only had 10% of the cars on the road, then the driverless technology would probably work, because the congestion is much lower, and you wouldn't be stuck in traffic all the time, because and the road maintenance costs would go way down. And there's all of these factors that result from changing one thing, right? So there's tipping points that are in your favor in that case. So there's human tipping points when everybody understands, not everybody, but maybe when 10% of the population understands that we're in a serious problem, we've got to change the operating system of society. Then the pricing, I don't think oil and gas, things don't generally disappear by policy, right? They disappear by economics. And so when the economics becomes completely unfavorable for gas and oil and coal and all the rest of the things, because we're pricing, correctly, then those things will just vanish very quickly.
Yeah.
So I think that's the sort of thing that we can hope for. So one conference doesn't do too much, really. But the conference is, it's just optically very bad. How can you have 80,000 people going to a climate conference? They've got totally unwieldy, because they've been going on now for so long. So this year, it became much more difficult for observers and NGOs to get badges. But I think, the UN, like Argentina, the contingent just left, as I said, after 3 days. They had 80 people here from the government. Like, why would any country have 80 people, and we're talking about Argentina, like how many, when Trudeau got elected in Canada, they said Canada's back. We had one of the largest contingents at the COP that year. And we had something like 150 or almost 200 people from the Canadian government attending the COP. So, the UN just needs to say, okay, do it on a per capita basis, maybe, but then you have to have modifications for small countries, right? Because you can't have half a delegate or a quarter of a delegate, allow at least maybe have caps, a percentage of the population, and, but you can't have you have at least 5 people, government people, and, negotiators, and then the leaders come in and shorten the conference and, make it, a week or less. And, let's do the negotiation that occurs in the last 2 days. Let's do that in the first 2 or 3 days. And then you don't need a conference that's longer than just a few days, really, right?
Or
right?
have a large Zoom meeting. And
yes.
then wrap it up in the last.
Yeah, you could, but we have to figure out, if you think of religion and churches and icons and symbols like the crosses, well, I think I'll form a new religion, and it's like the smartphone, and I drive, in parts of Baku, you drive and there's this massive, 100-foot statue of some some person who was very famous for the city, well, let's have a big statue of a phone, right? And you go on the subway, or you go throughout the COP through a crowded hallway. The dynamics of people walking in a crowded hallway has completely changed, because large numbers of people are staring at their phones in front of their face, not watching where they're going. And then they bump into somebody, and then it creates kind of a traffic jam in that hallway. The thing is these devices, we've let them completely change our lives, and they've completely brought us, they've reduced human contact. COVID, of course, completely accelerated that process. You have all your meetings on Zoom. Do you feel that you're getting the same thing out of all your meetings on Zoom? Then, those luncheons were fun. You could talk to people. You could go out for coffee afterwards with somebody. You got to know people personally. And if leaders around the world do that, they're less likely to want to invade and kill their neighbors. I never understand these border conflicts between countries where the people are mostly genetically the same on both sides. They're from the same backgrounds, but there's something called the border, and you have to push your border forward. And if you lose some of your border, then we need to change our operating system of how humans live on this planet, because we're not doing a very good job right now.
Okay, so we got John Meyer next, and then after that is Claude Buechner on deck.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. My question was basically, is there a political leader who's standing out? But I'm going to modify that question. First of all, I'd like to say we don't have to worry terribly about Azerbaijan increasing production by 50%, because they produce less than 1% of world oil, probably around
okay.
500,000 barrels a day, which I think Canada's 5 million now. I'm not sure. Anyway. I wanted to talk about Trump and Musk. Musk is being put in a position, essentially, of the way I see it, hand-picking the people who are going to run the government. That's how I see it. And he became successful. I really paid a lot of attention to how he managed to do what he did by developing the products he did, ramping up production the way he did, and completely trouncing some very, very astute companies in the marketplace, like BMW, Audi, this kind of thing. Mercedes, he just obliterated them. And that's what drew them into the EV space. And he interviewed for SpaceX, the first 300 employees, he interviewed every employee. And he's looking for people who will get the job done, who have experience, who know their fields. And if he applies that same capability to the American government, there aren't going to be any more liberals. There aren't going to be any Bible thumpers. They're going to be people who know their fields, and it'll give a completely different feel to government policy formation. And Musk himself is very much on the side of having to do something about climate. He mentioned, I saw him just a couple of weeks ago making the climate points at a Republican gathering with Trump, with Trump. And so, I think Trump knows this, and we don't know what's going to happen. But of all the political leaders we would want to have, carrying the ball, the U.S. would be number one, especially if they're fronted by extremely competent people, which might actually happen
Yes.
in part. So that's my comment.
That's I mean, do you know if Trump didn't like Vance anymore, could he can you get rid of your vice president and switch? I think Trump doesn't care about breaking laws, right? He's got the Supreme Court behind him. So, I mean, maybe he'll if he gets so chummy with Musk and doesn't like Vance, he can tell Vance to take a hike and put Musk as VP. I don't know if he can, but I think that, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, perhaps he can, if he's actually got the interests of the whole country, and it's America first, I know, but, if they have empathy for other people, I worry a bit about Musk, because he seems to lack empathy
Oh, yeah.
to people, and this could become, very bad. We've seen this in the 30s in Europe, right?
Yeah.
And it ended in World War II, sort of thing. So,
Yeah.
there's a lot of risks, and I think a very big risk that is underestimated. We've got two very narcissistic personalities, and you can't have that coexisting for very long. One of them is in disfavor, and that one would be Musk in this case, right? He does. So so all these if he has time to do all these policies, then yeah, maybe what you're saying is correct. But I'd be very surprised if Musk was still in the picture, say in 6 months.
Okay.
So we got one last question, and that's Claude.
Thanks. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Paul, for bringing us into your world in Baku there. I also signed up for the McKinsey & Company COP updates, and I saw a rather disturbing, it was a lead author of the latest sustainability report, which I have put in the chat. And it looked very well researched and wonderful graphs going to 2030 and 2050. This is the company that 2.5 years ago was telling the world that we need to spend 8 to 9% of GDP every year to make this transition happen. And so now it feels like they have regressed to the point where they explain that, well, we took another look, we talked to our customers around the world, and oil is going to be needed for the short and midterm, when they don't define what that is. Presumably that's 2050. And the only way that can be done is actually if we find new sources. So basically they're saying that we're actually going to increase, speaking of we're going to accelerate our drilling for new hydrocarbons. And so I was wondering, my question, that's a long-winded comment, does this reflect the general mood that you've seen so far? And if not, do they purposely keep COP in different bubbles so that the activists can talk to the activists, and you're not hearing what the McKinsey & Company are telling their major companies or customers throughout the world?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think it's important to think of the COP not as one conference, but as 40,000 people from different backgrounds getting together and going to their particular events. You can imagine the complexity, like the sheer number of booths, the sheer amount of information. Just about every NGO that's at the conference puts out a report for the COP. The WMO, World Meteorological Organization, had like a 50-page report. Just the Cryosphere had a party last night to the Cryosphere Pavilion had a party to commemorate, to honor or commemorate or celebrate that they just released a report all on the cryosphere, very detailed report, scientific report. And we were there to see the cryosphere at that point and got to chatting with a couple of the ice scientists who were British. And since we were going to a place called the British Pub, of course, we invited them and we invited other people, and the head of the climate repair, Sean Fitzgerald at Cambridge. And so we're connecting all of these people. But the point is that nobody has the same COP experience, right? And most people, you probably sitting at home with the reports that you get, you probably know more about those aspects, well more than I do. I mean, I'm walking these long hallways, I'm going to a session, learning about something, or presenting myself or interviewing somebody, so it's a whole bunch of disconnected stuff, right? So there's just, you're just overwhelmed by all of these things, and you have to choose certain ones that interest you, but there's not an overall sort of understanding, like, what the negotiators done so far. I mean, I had to go online and look because I can't go into the negotiation rooms. I don't have, that pass. So I have to just read the news reports. But I did go to dinner and we sat down. I was with my friends. I filmed a video outside and then met them. There's a place just outside the COP the prices are reasonable, in fact, very good. They're about a fifth as high as what they are inside. So, it's a very busy place. So, you can go there and get a decent meal for like less than $10 Canadian. And so there were three of us, and a fourth person sat down at the table. The whole room was packed and busy. The fourth person was the youth delegate to Finland, and he had the party badge and he was in. So I said to him, I said, I'm giving a talk in a couple hours on, so what's happened with the negotiations so far? So what I've told you, conveyed to you about the negotiations, the only reason I know that it was delayed 8-10 hours the first day, the only reason I know that the stock tape is a big deal, and that, those sort of things I only got from this guy, happened to get from this guy from Finland, who's there as a party delegate. Right. So, it's kind of like, we have really, it's just so unwieldy. You can't get, is this the way we want to run these things? I mean, it just doesn't make sense to have this many people in this many exhibits, and nobody gets the full picture. It's impossible.
Good point, Paul. Well, thanks.
Thank
Great
you.
point.
And maybe that shows that it is a drama. It's smoke and
It is.
mirrors. It's the show. It's the circus.
It is.
Yeah, but if there's only one circus going on, you probably there is a lot of learning and a lot of interaction, and you can carry that through for, if you're an organization, you can make the contacts and then work with other organizations. So there's pros and cons like anything else.
Sure. No, that's a good point. Well, at this point, I'll ask Jean to wind up and say thank you, and then afterwards we can have our informal offline discussion.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, I'm sharing accommodation with two people who will be trying to sleep.
Jean's just
So
going to give you the official thank you.
So I'm going to bail out here, and I can talk about it maybe when I'm back in Ottawa at the in the queue. After one of the talks, we can go on and talk about the COP more. It'll be over. I'll know a bit more.
Hang on for 1 minute.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Paul. As past chair of CACOR, it's my pleasure to have the opportunity to thank you very much for giving us this update on what's going on at the COP conference this year. It's really interesting to hear your take on this and the other talks that you've given on similar topics. It's been very interesting to listen to your perspective on how things have been done. So thank you very much for taking the time to give us the talk today, and thank your roommates for putting up with us and you being able to speak to us tonight. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for having me. And I adjusted my tripod position so I didn't block the fridge. That was very important.
Thank
Access
you.
to the
Thank you
fridge
very much.
from roommates. Okay. Thank you.